In a generation where many sequels have felt like high-budget safety nets, this is one of the greatest sequels we've got in this generation. It improves on the first game in almost every way. It's more confident in what it is, it's more refined and feels like a proper sequel without feeling like a DLC, with a fresh coat of paint, unlike other games we've got in this generation. I'm not talking about games we've got sequels to decades later, like Alan Wake 2 or Baldur's Gate 3, two fantastic games, but games such as Spider-Man 2 or God of War Ragnarok. For the first time this generation, I found myself saying, this feels like a PS5 game. But the big question is, if I didn't like the first game, would I like this? And to that I say, at times this game can feel more like a Metal Gear Solid 5 sequel than one to Death Stranding. But when it comes down to it, at its very core, this is undoubtedly more Death Stranding. Only it gets to the point faster and is more refined, more accessible, and in some ways more streamlined, for better or for worse. And I'll admit, going into it, I didn't know if this game would be interesting enough or hold my attention for 100 hours, especially because I just beat the previous game not even a month ago. And in the first few hours, I'd even go as far to say the first 40 hours, I was pleasantly surprised. And yet, the more time I've had to sit with the game and think about what it is that I played, I started to develop more mixed feelings on it. Now, I went ahead and got the platinum in this game. It took me over 110 hours. I played on the hardest difficulty, so I've experienced almost everything there is to experience. And I feel with the first game being so controversial in a way, that the big question people want to know is, what makes this game different? And I'll start with the open world. This isn't an expanded map of the first game. This is two entirely new continents, and the biome diversity here is a huge step up. There's deserts, red deserts, dense jungles, snow-covered mountains. This isn't just a visual upgrade, this is a whole new palette, giving this game a much different visual flair than the more Scottish mountains of the first game. And the visuals here are some of the most impressive you can find on a console, not just from a technical perspective, but also artistically. There'd be numerous times where I just look into the vistas and people would say how artistically it's just realistic, but I'd say there's a lot of character here and the recreation is done exceptionally well. I'm not usually a photo mode type of person, but I found myself often stopping and taking a picture. To me, this is the best looking game on the PS5. I feel like the camera work deserves a special mention too, with some of the best third person framing I've seen in the game. Sometimes it goes close, sometimes it zooms back. When you're in a vehicle, you can get a nice overhead shot, like just the way it swivels. Like it's just, I want to say it's a small thing, but it's really not. It's fundamental to the experience. There's also a day-night cycle now. And whilst it doesn't massively change gameplay, you never feel the need to rest and BTs don't become dramatically harder at night. This isn't Dying Light. The skyboxes alone do justify its existence. Yet, I do still wish that night came with more gameplay consequences, like imagine a survival element or an increased threat that just doesn't exist here. There's no reason ever to go to sleep. There's also a huge number of quality of life changes, down to small things such as being able to combine multiple ladders together into a mega ladder, trucks that can auto pick up items, more satisfying combat, vehicles that control and handle better, or most importantly, it's just a greater UI that's much more streamlined over the first game. This game in a way even feels more wacky than the first. You use guitars as weapons and coffins as skateboards. And you know the saying that you can just do things? That feels like Kojima when he made this game, him just doing things. However, whilst there are improvements here, I'd actually argue that some of these changes can water down the core experience of the first game, which for some may be a positive and maybe a negative for others. And because of the nature of this game, you would assume that this is a great podcast game, the type of game that you can put something on in the background to, but no. Here you just want to take in the scenery, take in the sound effects, take in the music. So no, you can't just play this game with a podcast or music on in the background. It doesn't go as well as you would think. At least that's how I felt in the first 50 to 60 hours. Now, as the game goes on and you've seen a lot of what the game has to offer, me myself, I did tend to put something on in the background. I came to bring the pain, hardcore from the brain. Find out my mental, based on instrumental records. Hey, so I can write monumental methods. I'm not the king, but niggas is decaf. I stick 'em for the cream. Check it, just how deep can shit get. Deep as the abyss, and brothers is mad fish, accept it. Nigga cross color, clothes are crossed over. Nigga totally crossed out and crisscrossed. Who the boss? Niggas get tossed to the side, and I'm the dark side of the force. Of course. A critique I will give the game is that it can be somewhat of a truck simulator, with the open world being so vast, so huge, and with a lot of it flat for the most part, with major quality of life improvements to how vehicles manage and traverse terrain. With the amount of facilities on the map and cargo you have to pick up, you are heavily incentivized to just be in a truck for 70% of this game. It makes me wish that there was a section of the map that was maybe more tight knit with facilities closer together that in some way incentivized you to not be in a truck all of the time. In the first game, I always carried 2 ladders and 2 climbing anchors. In this game, I use the ladders maybe 3 times in 100 hours, climbing pegs maybe once. In the first game, I used zip lines constantly. The zipline network was vital. But in this game, because I always had so much cargo with me at any given point, and the trucks can climb mountains like goats, I barely even use the zip lines. So the game is so vast that it's impressive, but in a way, it results in a dumbing down and simplification of the gameplay. So if the first was a walking simulator, this is more of a truck simulator. Another complaint is a zero enemy variation here. There are 2 types of enemies here. These guys on bikes who are cool and pop up randomly at times, very rarely I must say, and all of the other enemies, whose only real difference is how much health and armor that they have. There isn't any enemy that you encounter here and say, okay, I have to play this slightly different. Even the BTs you fight the same way you would fight a regular enemy. There are new BTs this time around, but this time, they have eyes, and they look super intimidating, but really, they're soft. I was shaking in my boots avoiding these guys until I realized, oh wait, not only are they easy to outrun on a bike or any other vehicle, but they also go down pretty easy too, making it so every time there was a BT around, I was just going guns blazing. There isn't a singular time in this game I used the hold breath feature. And I used it all the time in the first game. BTs used to be something you would stealth. Maybe you would use a blood grenade if it was in the way of the path you needed to take. Or maybe you would use the stealth takedown, but that's completely removed from this game. Anytime there's a BT here, you just pull out the hammer and get to clapping. But one of my biggest critiques here is the stealth is so good. Legitimately some of the best stealth in a game I've played in such a long time. But you only get to use it for the first 8 hours of the game or so. Then all of a sudden, enemies get all of this armor and it doesn't make sense to use stealth anymore. When you have to put 5 sniper rounds into an enemy and your sniper only carries 12 shots, it's like, what's the point? And as a result, you just go in doing every mission guns blazing for the most part, which can be fun in its own right, and the core gameplay has vastly improved. But for those of us who want to use the stealth, it becomes redundant. And it's a real shame, because the stealth system here is excellent. One thing I do like is that the game is infinitely more dynamic than the first game. And one way that they achieve this is a new weather system. The sandstorms, they blind you. Earthquakes, shifted terrain, flash floods wipe out structures, and avalanches that actually kill you. This keeps you on your toes, it keeps things fresh, and it makes each trek different. Just in general, it makes the world feel more alive. But some of the other new features I hear are the mines and the railway system, which I'm not sure how to feel about. I like the railway system, I feel like it's needed with how big the map is and how much cargo there is. But there's no fast travel while using it. These lines can take over 4 to 8 minutes. So you have to, I don't know, just stretch, check Twitter. It just seems tedious because you can fast travel on the ship, but that docks points. But the railway system doesn't dock points, so it feels this tedious, because we aren't docking points from you, we're gonna force you to sit through this animation of you on a zip line for 8 minutes. And I just don't like it. And mines, with there being so much to build, they're useful, but I never really engaged with them outside of 2 or 3 times where I just needed those extra materials that I probably could have just got from a facility anyway. There's animals now too, but they're practically useless. Transporting them isn't any different from transporting any other kind of cargo. In fact, delivering a pizza has more complexity to it. There's no custom or cool unlocks for collecting them all or anything like that, and it just seems like a really underdeveloped part of the game. And then there's also these enemy animals, I guess. These blob-like things, these flying bat-like things. But again, they're also a non-factor and a more visual noise and meaningful threats. You can just run past them and they don't seem fleshed out at all. As for the story reminds me of a Yakuza game, and I'm not talking about the scene that's basically directly pulled straight out of a Yakuza game. What I'm talking about, and more so the problem for me here, is the seriousness and the silliness. In a Yakuza game, you get the silly side in the side content, and the emotion and the seriousness in the main mission, which gives a nice balance, the sweet and savory, yin and yang type of dynamic. But here, the silliness and the seriousness is intertwined, which can make for a cool looking cinematic, but it takes away from the tone of the story and takes away from the impact. The motivations also just don't seem to make sense. Nothing gave me the impression that Sam would go on this journey. Doll Man is just a positivity merchant who chirps on your hip all of the time. Higgs is back, and he's not a good villain once again. Then there's themes here that are heavy, themes of connection and grief and perseverance, but the emotional payoff seems inconsistent here because Kojima wants to make Sam a semi-silent protagonist, so the themes never really feel like they truly carry any weight in the story. There are story twists, but they're either completely predictable or completely random and seem forced. The only positive note I'd give here, which is kind of similar to the first game in a way where I didn't think the story was that great. Sure, it came together and it made sense, but I felt more like the characters were more important than the story being told itself. And I feel like it's that all over again, where I really did like Rainy, I really did like Tomorrow. They were some of my favorite side protagonists in a game in a long while, and the visuals really helped bring the characters to life. But I would have liked a more compelling story that was a bit more serious, that did have more impact. I just don't feel like I got that here. And another thing I feel like this game has in common with the first game is that the location is kind of part of the narrative. And what I like is that in Australia, the people sound like they're from Australia.
Great. No issues establishing a chiral network connection. By the way, we've sent some folks out to recover the wreckage of that giant mech that attacked us earlier. Only prudent we study it, you know?
In Mexico, the people sound like they're from Mexico.
And there's our border, a sight for sore eyes.
That extra attention to detail goes really far, adding that extra piece of unique flavor because you don't really hear or see either of those places get represented in games. But once you're done with the story and everything's wrapped up, how's the end game? I mean, the post-game loop isn't very different from the mid-game. Once you've done 100 deliveries, you've essentially done them all. And a minor gripe that I have with the game is how late into the game you unlock level 2 roads. After you've spent the entire game building up your infrastructure, they then expect you to go back, retrace your steps, and do it all over again for faster roads. And it's like, well, okay, that's not happening. I would have liked to do that earlier on in the game simultaneously whilst I was building the roads the first time around. That way I could actually get some mileage out of it. But I'm not going to go and spend tens of hours finishing up every single road to only get another 10 hours worth of playtime from it. No. Another small, and it's a very small complaint I have is, like the first game, the chapters, the episodes, they don't have any timely consistency. You'll spend a few hours in maybe a chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up until 10, and then all of a sudden you're going through 5 chapters in 4 hours. And it was the same in the first game. However, here when this happens, you were locked out from fast traveling on the ship, which kind of forces you to just beeline the story. Because it's like, well, I can't fast travel, I don't have my freedom anymore, I have to lock in, I have to finish the story just to get my ship back. I kind of didn't like that. I like Death Stranding too, more than the first game. Even with all the flaws, even with the simplification and tonal inconsistencies, it's more fun, it's more ambitious, and more dynamic. It's one of the few big budget games that still feels like one person's vision. That being said, I don't want a Death Stranding 3. Not because I was bored by the end of it, far from it, but because I think this is where it should end. Kojima is 60 now, games take longer than ever to make, and with only a few titles likely left in his career, I want to see him cover new ground, give us a new world, new ideas, and fortunately that's what he's doing. Because whilst Death Stranding 2 does deliver a better version of the formula, I think the formula has run its course. And story-wise, it seemed like you had to stretch just to make this sequel. So if we got a Death Stranding 3, of course I would play it, but it's absolutely not something that I'm looking forward to. As for it being Game of the Year, I'm still undecided. It's for sure a contender, but whilst the first few hours, 10, 20, 30 hours I was into the game, I said, yeah, this is Game of the Year for me. The more I played it, the more I sat with it, I'm not sure anymore. It is between this game and Expedition 33. And I guess I just have to see how I feel at the end of the year, because as it stands right now, I couldn't tell you which one I'd pick. So maybe at the end of the year, I'll do a recap and I have my mind made up.